In this video, we're going to work out an example problem involving a percentage of change. And the question states to find the new amount. And I have 15 inches increased by 20%. And what I want to do in this example is really give you an in-depth look at a problem like this. So I'm not going to do this every time, but on this first one, I just want to show you the many, many ways that one could view this problem or one could look at this problem. The first idea that I haven't really talked about as much in previous videos, but I'll start with it here, is that I can use proportions to think through these problems. And here's how that would work. My percent is 20%, which literally means that I am gaining 20 out of every 100. So this is an increase of 20%. So I am gaining 20 for every 100 that I start with. So what is that? So if I'm gaining 20 for every 100 that I start with, well, they tell me that I'm starting with 15 inches as my actual amount or my actual length that I'm starting with. So I'm not starting with 100 inches. I'm starting with 15 inches. So gaining 20 for every 100 is the same exact thing as gaining how many for every 15. And if you solve this proportion, you're going to get the amount of the gain. Okay, so remember, this question says to find the new amount. This setup here is going to tell me how much I've increased or how much I've gained. So if I cross multiply here, 100 times x is 100x. 20 times 15, feel free to use a calculator if you want, but that's going to be 300. And if we divide both sides by 100 here to get my x by itself, 300 divided by 100 is 3. So this is 3 inches. And like I've been saying, make sure we're clear. This is a gain of 3 inches. Some of the questions will ask you, how much did you gain or how much did you add on to the length? That's not happening here. This one wants to say, what is the new amount? Well, I started with 15. I gained 3. 18 inches would be my final answer. So 18 inches is my new amount. Now, notice that it kind of took me 2 steps. Step 1 was just setting up and solving the proportion, and then step 2 was adding in that gain. What if I wanted to get to the answer right away? Can you think of a way that I could do that? Well, let me tell you how that would work. So remember that every single time, I always start with everything. So my starting point is always 100%. Now, there's an increase of 20%. So this was the increase. And if I put these two together, 100% plus 20% is actually 120%. So this is kind of my new amount as a percent. I have 120% of what I started with. Let's use this number and see what happens. So if my new amount is going to be 20% bigger, so my starting value is 100, so I basically have 120 of every 100 that I started with. So my new amount is 20% bigger, so as a percent, think of that as 120%. So having 120 out of every 100 would be the same thing as having how many out of every 15. And if you want to, you can make this a little bit easier on yourself by simplifying this fraction. We can divide by 10. So this would be 12 over 10 equals x over 15. And then we could even go another step and divide by 2. 12 over 10 would be the same thing as 6 over 5. And if you're more comfortable, you of course can cross multiply with these larger numbers. But the little bit easier way would be to simplify this fraction. 6 over 5 equals how many out of 15? And we'll see there's a nice easy relationship here, is that this is 3 times bigger and this is 3 times bigger. 6 times 3 would be 18. And notice that you get your final answer right away, 18 inches. Now, let's look at it another way. Let's use the percent equation idea. So we know from our old stuff that our part was equal to some, let me rewrite percent there. My part is equal to some percent of my whole. But now that I'm dealing with the percentage of increase stuff, I know that my percentage of change multiplied by what I had originally would equal my amount of change. All right, so let's try this. So in this case, it says increase by 20%. So my percentage of change is 20%. 0.2, 2/10, 20 out of 100, 20%. I originally had 15. So what is 15 times 0.2? 2 times 5 would be 10. 0, carry the 1. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. You have a 1 number after the decimal here, so move this 1 over. And there's our value of 3 coming up again. So my amount of change, well, I started off not knowing it, so we'll call that x. And then after multiplying 0.2 times 15 together, I know that my amount of change is 3 inches. But that is not my final answer. You know, once again, I would have to add 15 plus 3 to get to 18. Now, just like with the proportions, if I wanted to get there in one step, let's look at it using the 120% idea. So my percent that I'm ending up with is really 120%. So I'm going to put 1.2 in for the percent. So I'm kind of using this taught formula here. Now, my original or my whole amount or my starting value is 15. So I'm going to do 1.2 times 15. And this time, it's not going to give me my amount of change, but it's going to give me my ending value. So, so we'll call this new amount. So it says find the new amount. So this is new amount. And we just got to do 1.2 times 15. So we'll work it out by hand. So if I have 1.2 times 15, 5 times 2 is 10. Carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Placeholder 0. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Add. And we got one number after the decimal here, so we got to move this decimal 1 over, and there's our 18. So our new amount would be 18 inches. All right, one more quick idea here that I want to show you. Sometimes when you look at these problems, they'll draw a nice little picture. Now, let me show you how that would work. So let's say that this bar right here represents what I start with. And on one side of the bar, I'm going to write what I start with as a percent. And what I start with as a percent is always 100%. What do I have as just a value or a quantity here? It's 15 inches. So 100% of what I started with is 15. Now, sometimes if you're losing an amount, you're going to go backwards. If it's a percentage of decrease, you're going to head to the left here. The bar is going to get smaller. In this case, we're getting bigger. So we're going to add on to this bar. So here, I'll put it in, I'll make it blue. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, and what that's supposed to represent is this idea of going up by 20%. So if I add 20% to what I started with as a percent, I'm ending at 120%. Now, we already calculated it. What does that mean in terms of the 15? Well, 20% of the 15, we already calculated. 20% of 15 was 3. So gaining 20 for every 100 is the same thing as gaining 3 for every 15. 120% of 15 would be 18. It's exactly what 15 plus 3 is, and that was 18 inches. So whenever you're setting up this bar, make sure you understand that you would take 120% of the original 15 to get this value. So the 120 and 18 kind of go together. That's my new amount values as a percent and as an actual number. And then there's my amount that I'm going up. I'm gaining 20% of 15. 20% of 15 is a gain of 3. So the 20% and the 3 are kind of connected.